Welcome to the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga Community. I'm your host, GuruNischan, and as always, I like to read the intentions for why I started this podcast. Number 1, to break the veil of silence that has long permeated and continues to strangle the 3HO Kundalini Yoga Community in the name of neutrality. Number 2, to validate and help clarify the complex feelings of those who have joined this lifestyle, were born and raised into it, and or who have practiced or taught Kundalini Yoga. Number 3, to encourage active listening to uncomfortable conversations from our community as a revolutionary act of self and collective healing. Number 4, to let survivors know that we see them, we believe them, we love them, and we will continue to fight for their truth to be addressed. Number 5, to let teachers who are denying, gaslighting, or spiritually bypassing know that what they are doing is willfully ignorant and re-traumatizing to victims. Number 6, to illuminate the inherent racism, homophobia, cultural appropriation, and exploitation that perpetuates the teachings, 3HO lifestyle, and overall community ethos. Number 7, to stop the perpetuation of gaslighting and victim shaming by naming it for what it is. Number 8, to dismantle internalized shame, guilt, toxic positivity, and light-washing mentality. Number 9, to honor all of the parts of ourselves that have been forgotten or silenced. Number 10, to honor each and every body that has come through this community, both named and unnamed. And number 11, to encourage people to do their own research, to process their own emotions, to get somatic therapy and cult-specific therapy, as well as other support as needed, to draw your own conclusions, and to be critical thinkers rather than to just blindly follow anyone. Please remember that your story matters, and please share it when and if you're ready. We're here to listen and to support you. So folks, I am giving you a 3HO land update because there has been all sorts of things going on since reparations. We were in the throe of reparations for a while. I think that many and most would agree that it was just a real re-traumatizing process, a manipulative process, a very 3HO type manipulation. And it served their purposes to be able to lower their liability as much as possible, pay out as much of the liability that they know they were going to have to deal with. And, a part of the reparations is that we had to not speak our numbers out loud, right? So that was a part of the agreement and our signing and all the things, unless it was in your own house. So, within your own household, you could compare and all the things. But then by the end of the reparations program, the program itself sent out a letter saying that, now it's okay for you to share because we're all done. And I think it just really, at least what it felt like to me in my body, was a real punch in the stomach of what it felt like all along, was that this was just a way to gag people. Because we already understand that we haven't grown up understanding our value and our worth, because that's one of the symptoms of growing up in a cult. I know for myself, I was never expecting to receive any money from 3HO and from my experiences in my life. So I think the whole thing was just an add-on bonus, but the process itself brought up a lot of undealt with complex trauma. And I know it did for a lot of us and for a lot of people that haven't looked at a lot of this stuff for a long time. And so the whole thing just kind of felt payoff energy-like. And that was both disgusting, frustrating, and also like I wouldn't expect it any other way, coming from 3HO Sikh Dharma of the Western Hemisphere, as they called it. So there's a lot with the reparations program. In the midst of all that, there was the whole chaos of the board elections. And you had these factions that started getting formed since 2020. It was like the denier group, which was like the pro-YB group. And then there was the people who, quote, the believers, like the believing of the allegations. I forget what they called themselves. But what we witnessed since 2020 was, a faction of people that, quote, believed survivors, but still wanted to hold on to the teachings and the technology. And then there was a whole nother faction that aren't paying attention to survivor stories at all, that are in just full denial. And so roughly those are the two kind of branches of people. And there's a ton of people that have been out forever and aren't even paying attention to any of that. And then there's a ton more yoga students and people that just carry on teaching because, frankly, I think people just haven't been able to listen to the stories enough to really know what has happened to our own brothers and sisters and our own children and each other. And so that's a process, right, of when are people going to actually notice and pay attention. Anyway, the board got taken over by the deniers. So if you haven't heard that took place. The board elections did happen, and it became majority pro-YBers. So since then, leaders of KRI, like the CIOs and the different factions of these different leaders in these organizations, have been either resigning or being let go and being filled with people in the camp of the people not listening to survivor stories, the real hard-line YBers. So recently I heard that Jagat Guru became the CEO of KRI. I saw some sort of video where he was sharing his excitement. Now, Jagat Guru is in my generation, and he's married to one of my best friends growing up named Guru Dev, and they have spent most of their entire lives in India. Jagat Guru went to school there from a young age. And they got married at 18 and ended up living their life over there when they got sent by Yogi Bhajan. And so if you've heard, I started noticing in like 2021, 22, that Jagat Guru was, really kind of using the same kind of predatory lingo of Guru Dev Singh and YB as he's traveling through China and Mexico. And, there's all these different regions where Kundalini Yoga is spreading wildfire-like. And the pro-YBers were really doing a whole thing around instigating their capacity in their voter group, which is one of the reasons I guess they had to do the third party vote system, because there was a whole faction. Nobody believed that the voting system could be equal and done transparently. But when it was done transparently, the pro-YBers won out. And honestly, folks, I think I'm pretty happy about that. I think that the rebranding that I started witnessing by the people that were trying to walk a neutral line is the way it felt for me. Like, they're listening to survivor stories and yet also not changing much. They just wanted to take Yogi Bhajan off the face of things and then kind of keep teaching things as they are. But as we heard from Manju's story in the last episode, the latest version of the global teacher training was essentially a culturally appropriated, non-culturally aware lack of awareness in the middle of kind of this KRI sponsored global teacher training. So I wasn't happy with what I was witnessing in what felt like light washing and whitewashing of the teachings, trying to take the teachings without the teacher, which I think is one of the worst predatory formulas that YB used to kind of create our undying loyalty to Kundalini Yoga. I think it was an early on trickery. So you really saw a 3HO website become a non-3HO website. It was so weird. They went from the 3HO logo to like a golden sun, and then started putting people of color on there and talking trauma healing language. And it just felt like, cultural appropriation and whitewashing and lightwashing and kind of, what neoliberals love to do. So not saying people that are doing that stuff are liberals. I'm just saying it's kind of the same trickery of kind of like placating change, but nothing actually changes on the surface. So that, I guess with the change of the board, I guess I want to say that at least we see it like it is. They're going to take it over and they're going to spew exactly what they've always spewed, right? What 3HO and Sikh Dharma has always spewed, which is cult-like. So do the thing, right? And let us see it in plain sight. I think that's kind of what I'm pleased about. But it has been some chaos for those that have been tuned into all those board elections and stuff. I have to say, after the reparations, I kind of started tuning out and taking some much needed respite for my own mental health and doing a lot of mental health therapy since 2020, realizing if you've been listening to these podcasts, that the whole process of listening has been very transformational for me. And I know it's been very transformational for many of you to be able to hear stories and testimonies and to be able to see yourself through another person's experience, because we're going through the same decades of time through different people's stories and lenses and lived experiences. So it's a very interesting process. There's also been a lawsuit, and I want to just go back to the reparations. I hope that a lot of lawsuits are coming forward to 3HO, Sikh Dharma, and whatever the organizations, SSSC. So a lot of people didn't take the reparations, and they are filing lawsuits, and thank goodness. So there was a major lawsuit that's been filed, and it is public, and it is worth reading. It consists of 4 women that were on his staff, on YB's staff. 3 of them are second generation, and it is very graphic. It was very heart-wrenching for me to read, knowing that I know at least 2 of them. And I just feel like this is so important for all of us to witness, to bear witness to. A part of healing is to be seen and to be heard and to be acknowledged. And I've learned in the last couple of years through this podcast and through my own process of healing that, one of the ways that predatory abuse has been able to go on in 3HO and a lot of cults in general is that we don't speak about it. We just don't say anything. We might be sympathetic and we might even be a listening ear if the person came to us personally, but we just don't speak about it in public space. And so it's one of the things that I am working on and doing actively with this podcast is speaking about predatory experiences in a public domain is such a valuable tool for self-recovery. And that's what we do when we are healing and recovering ourselves from cults, is we go through a process of recovering our essential self. And so this process of listening to each other is a very crucial aspect. I know that the group therapy that we were able to do with other second gen and 3HO over the last couple of years was very healing and supportive. That helped me morph to get some other therapy with adults that were also children that were born in cults. So I really encourage all of us to get cult-specific therapy, whether it's group therapy. Within the cultic studies world, there is first generation and then there's second generation or born in. There are resources available for all of us, and the power of deprogramming is, in essence, that we're able to access more and more of our essential self and less of the cult indoctrinated self. I just want to commend the ladies for filing this lawsuit and all of you that are filing lawsuits that didn't take the reparations buy off, essentially, because they gave really low numbers. And they knew that they were giving low numbers, but they just didn't have to give much more because I think they knew majority of us wouldn't do much more with it. And yet I think there's a lot of people that are carrying on. So I really am here holding the space for all of y'all that are suing these MFers. Woo woo. I encourage you to go read the lawsuit. You can go to KundaliniYogaAbuse.com and the link is in the bio. Els Kunin is constantly putting together all of the content that's coming out on this and putting it in one location on her website. So I think that's just such an awesome service. And on that note, what's also happened in the last couple of years has been the publishing, the co-authorship of me partnering with Els to bring forth Under the Yoga Mat, the dark history of Yogi Bhajan's Kundalini Yoga. I highly encourage you to get a copy. All of the proceeds go to nonprofit support for kids born in cults and children that were abused. I think It's unfortunate a bit that the book has been promoted as something that Else uncovered or discovered, because that was never her stated intention. She told me that she was never wanting to be the focal point of it. And a part of our collaboration was to ensure that she wasn't the focal point of it. But I think that that's often what happens when dealing with a group of people in cults. It's very easy to center someone, and it's also easy to allow yourself to get centered as the person responsible for uncovering the mystery or uncovering the hidden stories or uncovering why this is just coming to the surface now. And the truth is, Else didn't uncover anything. This information has been very much out and available, and the stories are there. People have been writing and speaking to these things. What Else has done, in my personal opinion, is she listened. She listened to every single one of my podcasts and started transcribing them so that she could take little pieces of them and make them available for easy consumption. And when she came to me wanting to write this book, I partnered with her because I wanted to make sure that it's brought publicly well, right? That it has consent of all the people's voices who are contributing to it, and that it's not coming off as a piece of something that she's bringing forth, but rather that's been available all along. And I think she's brought her talents of researching and her scientific organizational skills to really bring forth a book that not only reflects the stories from the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, but also all of the other content that has been around since 1970s, 80s, 90s, all of the work of activists and truth tellers all the years, and just put it into one book. I think what's also really fantastic about the way that it's laid out, which again, kudos to you, Else, is that we don't join a cult. We join something that's meaningful, that matters. And the book really shares what people joined, right? What mattered, what was meaningful. And I think it's just well done in that way, that it really shares the story. You really get a feeling around why we have reverence and love, and why distilling and breaking apart our identities from within this distortion called 3HO, Sikh Dharma, Kundalini Yoga, whatever you identify with, it's not an easy unbind, right? That's why Janja Lalich talks about bounded choice. On one hand, we think we're making choices, independent thought, critical choices, but in reality, they're bounded choices. And so this has to do with disorganized attachment in our brains. The book is fantastic. If you haven't gotten a copy, please support the work. I think it is a fantastic manual when you are talking to somebody and they're trying to wake up for the first time. This is an excellent place to start because it puts it all under one cover, so that if people want to listen more, they can listen. If they want to read more, they can go read. If they want to understand the academics, the cult studies that have been, the Time magazine, just everything is in one place. I think it'll blow a lot of your own minds that haven't taken the time to read it. It's the first place I suggest people start when they are just trying to wake up. You can also get it on audio. We're also in the process of working with various people that are contributing their time and their efforts to get them translated into other languages. It's how Else got started in doing this, not just listening to my podcast, but she translated one of the survivor stories from Italian to English so that we could all read it and hear the horrific story of Marina and then her daughter, Olivia, who was on the podcast. So, the web of our connectivity and our support and our care is all here. And again, I can't recommend that book enough. Under the Yoga Mat, available on all platforms, wherever you buy books. And it's also available in Europe, and it's also available on audio. So you can listen to it on Google Audio. Go to the link in the bio, the Kundalini Yoga Abuse. You can also get the link to the lawsuit and almost any update that's happening in 3HO Kundalini Yoga. Else is putting it on that website. So keep listening. I encourage everyone to be getting their own personal support and therapy, but also specific group therapy. I can't encourage it enough, especially for first generation. I mean, of course, especially for second generation, because I'm second gen and I know how important it is for my own recovery. But I say especially for first generation, because one of the most important things that I've learned in cult recovery is that deprogramming doesn't just happen when you leave the cult, that there are aspects to our own brain process and the way we organize and integrate in the world or don't integrate in the world, that doesn't really happen until you really face some of this stuff, some of the choices that were made. When you are joining a cult, it is different than when you're born into one. And so there are very different psychological ramifications that those of us that were born in have to unpack than those of you that joined. And I have a lot of empathy for those of you that joined because, as you've probably heard listening to my own story, I discovered in 2022, and I say discovered because that's when I consciously made the realization that the business, the network marketing business that I had built for 12 years and changed my whole entire life and life trajectory for, and got success in, and then got terminated from my own company. The whole dynamic, it was also a cult. It was a commercial cult. And so while I had left 3HO from when I was young, there was so many dynamics that ended up getting repeated in that business that were unconscious power dynamics that were running in me and through me. And it was only once I made that connection in 2022. Now, I knew it was a cult back in 2012 when that business ended. So I knew, like, whoa, whatever just happened, this is like a cult, like my upbringing. But I didn't recognize it as a cult, just like I didn't recognize 3HO, Sikh Dharma. I didn't name it as a cult until 2020. Even though I always recognized it as cult tendencies and cult-ish ways, I always had so much reverence for Kundalini Yoga that I never really named it for what it was and the amount of psychological and emotional abuse that I endured through my upbringing. And in 2020, when I finally recognized I had CPTSD and I finally recognized I was raised in a cult, not a spiritual community, and I started looking at the signs and the symptoms and reading about cultic studies and understanding the impact on early child development, the brain, the heart, the nervous system, trauma response, getting support, betrayal trauma, learning in therapy, these different types of impacts of a very simple emotional developmental trauma. That's when I started healing from it in a very exponential way from 2020 forward. I could recognize patterns in me as complex PTSD patterns instead of soul patterns. That's what I used to call them, because my only lingo, my only language was kind of like this psycho-spiritual mystical language that I had through Kundalini Yoga, which, I love that language. Don't get me wrong. I love listening to the call of my soul. It's one of the reasons I love Japji. I loved early morning prayers. These things aren't wrong unto themselves, but how they were warped and commingled with other self-deprecating, self-depreciating tendencies, because I grew up around so much deprivation, such a lack of care, lack of basic needs being met. So making these connections, because I've never had an identity as a victim. I've never had an identity as somebody that felt deprived or depraved. And so these things are hard to reconcile, which is why therapy is helpful, because you can start to make sense of things that don't make any sense and things that have just been packed away and not processed and not dealt with and just compartmentalized. I want to say how much this podcast itself has helped me. I think if you've listened to all of them, you noticed around episode 39, after 39 episodes, I started breaking through my own internalized programming around white supremacy and white exceptionalism and entitlement, and how much of that is commingled and interspersed in 3HO. The next several episodes, I started unpacking the predatory formula and the whiteness that's kind of embedded into the culturally appropriated stealing of Sikhi, and yet also using our whiteness as kind of an exception to Sikhi. I mean, it was just all very warped. So, I've unpacking all that, and then that process, and then I stayed doing interviews, but this whole process has helped me discover more about myself, which is why I started another podcast called Uncomfortable Conversations on Predatory Patterns in business, in community, and in culture. Because these predatory patterns, as I started unpacking them within myself, within specific to 3HO, and then specific within the commercial cult that I joined, I couldn't not see them everywhere. I started to see the predatory patterns in my everyday life, right? In culture, in business, in corporate, in, not just in network marketing, but in lots of ways that people are slave to their own jobs and capitalism in and of itself, and then colonialism, and then white imperialism, and then Western imperialism. And it just started And all that through stories. And so it feels very enlivening to feel my heart, what feels like to be the first time, really tending to myself, listening to you tell your stories, listening to other people tell their stories, being willing to listen to Black men and women tell their stories about whiteness. Holding that space was very intense because it was helping me unpack a lot of unconscious false identity, because I didn't grow up as a white woman, right? I grew up as a Sikh woman in GuruNischan, Kar Khalsa. And so you're so countercultural that you're almost kind of morphing identity in mainstream America because we grew up so different. And yet that's not the real identity of me. And so in this last couple of years, asking better questions about who I am. And I've always known my dad's side's Swedish and my mom's side's Jewish, but these stories of examining my own whiteness and cultural otherness and what it means to have such a unique identity because I grew up in 3HO Sikh Dharma in America. And how when you start to not have the cultural dress, how it doesn't mean that the level of exceptionalism that you think you have doesn't go away, right? Our names kind of serve that sense of exceptionalism a bit. And then I started listening to how, offensive our names are and the cultural appropriation linked to all that. And so it's just a real process of de-identifying, right? Decolonizing, unpacking cult impact. Who am I beneath that? So, changing my name has been a process. GuruNischan is still very much a part of me and my life and my brand and my whole experience. But, getting rid of Kar and Khalsa has been something that I knew from the get-go was not really a part of me. And so I did change my name to Schoenberg, which is my mom's side lineage, some of the earliest Jewish settlers that came in the 1800s to the U.S. from Germany. I'm rematriating and learning about my own Jewish history and just really getting right within myself. And this process of recovering my essential self, who I am before I joined the cult. Well, I was born and raised in 3HO, so I don't really get to do that process. But I joined the commercial cult. And so I've been on this process of since 2022 and recognizing that there's an actual process for deprogramming when you join a cult. And it's like calling your spirit back. Have you ever heard that in like Native Indigenous talk? This idea that a part of you is kind of wrapped up and tied into something else, and a part, you go through a process of like recovering your essential self. There was a small window where I was getting out from the influence of my father. I think I did a few episodes on that if you listened, when I was in Minnesota and working for the school. And I was graduated high school, and then I moved to Africa, and then just the whole journey of life. And there was a small window in my 18, 19, 20, 21-ish years that I could feel myself. There was a sense of me emerging. And then I joined a commercial cult. But again, now in reflection, I can say these things. And so this process of getting support for the first time, letting myself have it, letting myself have support, that somebody every week is there to just let me talk, to listen to me fully. And then somatic work has helped me so much really be with my body, biology of my body, and what are the actual markers that show me when I'm activated. And somatic therapists are just so lovely in that way, because there's so much meaning in how our body's communicating with us. And if I learned anything about Kundalini Yoga, is I used it as a mechanism to override how I was feeling, because how I was feeling was never allowed. It never had space. It never had availability. Nobody ever had attention or availability for how I was feeling. So I had to learn to tend myself, and I wasn't actually really tending myself. I was just using Kundalini Yoga as a mechanism to bypass my system. Now, I didn't come up with that. That was an early mechanism I learned growing up. So that served me throughout my whole life. Even when I was in a commercial cult, I was able to function in a very high capacity, basically on nothing. And I thought that there was a lot of pride in that. I've carried a lot of pride in my life for not needing anything and still being able to shine. And while that, I guess, is a beautiful trait, what I've learned through a lot of different types of therapy over the last 4 years is that it's not a trait that I necessarily want to continue bearing. I don't need to keep using that as the armor through life, because I am like any other human, deserve support and love and care and tenderness. I deserve to eat regularly and to sleep and to be touched and to be held and to be listened to, as do you. So I can't encourage you enough to get some support. Even if you don't think you need it, if you're the one listening to this saying, I don't need that, yeah, go ahead and get yourself a therapist. Yeah. It doesn't have to just be a talk therapist. Some people just think it's talk therapy. There's so many other really great types of therapy than just talk therapy, but it's also a great one. EMDR, internal family systems. I mean, just there's some gems. But going back to first gen, if you've listened to the podcast in the last year, so much of my process was waking up to one of the biggest predatory patterns in 3HO is how the first generation uses the second generation for emotional support. So basically, we are the lifeline. The kids are the lifeline. We are the saviors that are going to change the world. And again, this is built into the 3HO predatory abuse that YB punished the parents and built up the children, but all in rhetoric, right? And nobody was taken care of, and everybody was being abused and disorganized. So there's some interviews that I've done where some of these adults left in the 80s and some left in the 90s. And what I can tell from so many different stories is that first gen, y'all need some therapy. Like, get some therapy, get some help. If you do not have a therapist right now and you consider yourself somebody who joined Kundalini Yoga or 3HO at any point, then get a dang therapist, get help, because time and distance isn't it, it isn't it. And so there's so many aspects to examine that can make you more available to what your children are saying and what the young people are saying, and how your voice matters in learning how to be available to this. Because if you listened, I did a whole episode on first generation fragility, which is basically using the analogy of white fragility and how white people just collapse when having a racial conversation, because we have never learned how to have healthy conversations around race, because that shit just got shut down and white people just weren't allowed to talk about it anymore. And black people had to keep talking about it because they live in black skin. And so the next 30 years of stunted development of white folks, really is clear. That's what white fragility is. But first generation fragility is the same thing. A lot of y'all can't be available to the conversation in front of you because you collapse emotionally, because you have so much unprocessed pain, because you too are survivors of 3HO, Sikh Dharma, Kundalini Yoga. And I don't care if you don't see it that way. I don't care if you've learned to cope and reconcile and you've created a great, beautiful life. Congratulations. You are an amazing, resilient human, and I'm proud of you. And you still need therapy because you joined a cult. So on that note, I get emails once in a while from some of you. And I got an email from a first gen who wanted to do an episode with me. And I didn't reply because, I oftentimes just feel that some of you that are writing me, first gen, are not ready. You're just like a stream of consciousness that just need to get stuff out of your chest and out of your cells and out of your nerves and out of your head. And you just want to talk. You just want to be pedestaled for a minute on the podcast and tell your story, but you haven't actually processed your participation in all the things. And all that tells me isn't that you're a bad human. It doesn't tell me that at all. It tells me you need help, support, someone to listen to you. And that's normal. So get a therapist, because I'm not one. I'm not a therapist. And so it's normal to reach out and not be ready. So don't feel bad about reaching out and then not be ready. But I'm talking about some of you reach out and then your stream of consciousness. And then I tell you, this is not a platform from coming here and just telling your opinion about what you think about the YBer side or the denier side. This isn't about sides. To me, there isn't sides. Take whatever side. It's either recognizing that 3HO is a cult or you're not recognizing it yet. And any side you want to take within the process of getting to that realization, I just say more power to you, because it's going to be a part of your process to wake up and recognize what's in plain sight and the content and the material and the stories that are available for listening when and if you're ready. And I've also learned in therapy that some people will never be ready. Some of us may go our entire lives and never wake up and listen to the realities of other people's pain right here in plain sight that we participated in, that we stayed silent about, that we never recognized. So that process is one that you enter in your own time. And I really respect that. But please respect what I say to you. It's called a boundary. I say no. When you're ready to come and share your personal story, yes, you get to come share your story, but coming and sharing your opinion about what it, the different factions and how people, that's not what this podcast is for. Nope. So if you've listened to the first generation fragility story, you know that I've had several run-ins with all different first generation people who left 30 years ago, people who left, a couple decades ago, and people that are just waking up to that now. And that same symptom of first generation making it the second generation's responsibility to process your unpacked pain. It's not for us. And when second gen wake up to that as a boundary, it's a powerful thing, and it's a part of my process of empowerment. So I just say no to that. And yeah, I don't think a lot of us in 3HO learned how to respect boundaries, right? Because there weren't any. Yeah, there weren't any personal boundaries, but especially from adults to the children. So we're just going to leave that right there. I really encourage you to get some support, first gen. Can't encourage it enough. And I do appreciate all of the love and support that you give, all of you that recognize and are listening to survivor stories and believing us, but also get support, because you're still talking cult rhetoric. I hear you, I listen to you, and you don't yet hear it because you can't see something until you're really out of it. And so this is what cult specific therapy and group support especially, it's really, really interesting, because one of the formulas of cults is that there's like a specific formula. And so when you start to realize it's less and less specific to the ideology we come from, but we very much carry certain traits of exceptionalism and specialness. I'll let you listen to the past episodes. Go back and listen to First Generation Fragility if you haven't, and listen to the stories. Manju's episode that we just did was fantastic, because she was bringing it present day and breaking down the hypocrisy that exists within this special technology, Kundalini Yoga, KRI. From what I hear, those people that are listening to survivors but are still teaching Kundalini Yoga, because now the board has been taken over, there's a bunch of people trying to figure out what they're going to do, right? How do they continue teaching? Do they need to create their own body of work? Can they still teach what they're teaching and have it not be affiliated with KRI? What's their own bodies of certification? Anyway, these folks got a lot of work in front of them. I honor you in your quest for that, whatever that is. That is definitely an unpack right there. And for those of you that can just keep teaching in your own way without needing to be affiliated with KRI or calling it Kundalini Yoga or getting any of the special magic formula that you think comes with any of that, but you've integrated breath science and dynamic movement and dance and other types of meta healing, I encourage you to find a new way and have it be as unaffiliated with anything called Kundalini Yoga as you can, because the KRI folks are going to roll with it, and the predatory formula is in full effect. We got a couple movies coming out. I think one coming out by Rick Rubin's media group, and that one's called May the Longtime Son. Then we got another group, I believe they're sponsored through HBO. I heard last that they are doing an opening. Maybe the first 2 episodes are airing at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York in mid-June. I believe that Breath of Fire, that is the other one that's showing, is going to be episoding itself there, hopefully coming out on streaming platforms soon, but haven't gotten any dates on that, so I will keep you informed when I know. I think that's the reflections I wanted to bring you. I wanted to let you know that the next season of episodes that we are going to be doing here are going to be second generation focused. So if you haven't heard, now you've heard. Second generation is the focus for the next episodes coming out. If you are a second generation or a born in, whatever that means, you were born in, you were young, you didn't choose it, and you were born into this sucker, or any story in that realm of being a child and being brought in, even if you were brought in by your yoga student parent, tell us your story. You can reach out to me at gn@GuruNischan.com if you want to tell your story. We have a couple bangers that we just recorded, and I'm really excited for you to hear some of the testimonies coming forth. The nature of the healing process is it just takes time. Some of you have reached out to tell your story, and then you've disappeared again, and then you've joined, and then you reached out and then disappeared. And I just want you to know how normal that is. Don't feel bad. Don't have any self-condemnation. When we are ready to tell our story, we will know. First gen, I think a lot of you haven't done enough self-reflection to be telling your story too much. I'll make a few exceptions, but the last, I haven't gotten very healthy reach outs. So I'm focusing on second gen because I need to have some healthy boundaries. So second gen is going to be the focus, and we have some great episodes coming forth. Heart wrenchers and ones to really tend to yourself as you're listening to them. So once again, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for your support. I want to encourage you to buy the Under the Yoga Mat book, Under the Yoga Mat, Dark History of Kundalini Yoga. YB's Kundalini Yoga. Not that I know of another Kundalini Yoga, but somebody says it exists. But, go back and listen to the episode I did with Ravi. Like, even that episode, I'm not too impressed with the people teaching any sort of yoga out here that are still using the basic format and formula of Kundalini Yoga. Because what I got from that conversation is he hasn't unpacked a lot. And homeboy left in the 90s, Hey, no power, no, nothing against him. Bless his heart. I think that he's built a wonderful brand, him and his partner. But my point in that is that it really, the language, the mystical, there was just so much that hadn't been contemplated in that conversation that really boggled my mind. And so many people that follow these yoga groups are still doing that. I mean, I see it in wellness worlds, not just Kundalini Yoga, like the level of non-attentiveness to what's in plain sight. It's a mystical bypass that somehow, hasn't, been rooted. And there's some really basic things that haven't been examined, especially the mantras. So to be able to keep culturally appropriating the mantras and just, some of the placating language around why it's okay and the ultimate oneness and nope, not enough for me. It's not scientific enough. It's still using too much mystical manipulation, psychological word salad formula stuff. And, it is also fetishizing. It's like a lot of Orientalism in there. It's like fetishizing so many things that just, you can extract and get some of the dynamics of the practice without fetishizing Sikhi, without fetishizing the mantras, without fetishizing, some ancient technology that basically was a predator that raped all our children. Stop it. Just stop it. Anyway, so again, another example of a first generation that really hasn't deprogrammed, right? And so this is what I mean by it doesn't matter how long ago you left. If you're not actively getting support for your brain body to reprogram itself into the world, I can't encourage it enough. That's all I'll have to say on that. I hope you've enjoyed this little update. I love and appreciate you. More episodes coming soon. I just wanted to kind of give the update. In Barcelona on July 3rd to the 6th, there is the annual conference for the International Association of Cultic Studies. If you're not familiar with them, they're called ICSA. I'll have the link in the bio. Else and I are doing a presentation on the power of listening in cult recovery. So it's the theme this year for the conference is evidence-based practices for cult recovery, and there'll be lots of different speakers. You can attend online if you're not going to fly to Barcelona and be with us. But if you do want to fly to Barcelona and be with us, come join the party. And again, that's July 3rd to the 6th. We're doing a short presentation because of Under the Yoga Mat, and really the whole focus is on listening. The power of listening to ourselves, to each other, and listening in a new way. Well, folks, I really appreciate you. If you have other updates on things that you want me to tell people in 3HO Kundalini Yoga world, please send me an email because I'll totally give other updates. You can tell I don't really follow 3HO world too much, but if I hear some things, I always like to announce it. I'm just feeling happy that I'm feeling more and more like myself, a whole new version of myself, than I do the pull and the bind of the culture I was raised in. And that is a very, very powerful and potent place to be. It's because I am personally doing the work to recover my essential self from the predatory patterns that I was born and raised into, that I was bred into, that I was marinated in, that I was proudfully carrying armor in the world to shine through as a survival pattern, an ultimate survival pattern. And so this process of slowing down enough and letting myself have space and play and support and therapy is teaching me a lot. And one of those things it's teaching me is how hungry I am. Hungry for food, like regularly. And that's a really funny realization. So there's a lot of things that kind of come up that you don't even realize about yourself. And I know that all of you have stories of that as well that are in cult recovery processes. So when you are ready, please reach out. Come share your story, because your story does matter and people are listening, and your story will help somebody else wake up to an aspect of themselves, and then vice versa. When they share their story may help you wake up to an aspect of yourself. I thank you again for your listening support. Whatever podcasting platform you are on, please rate and review us right now. 5 stars. And it does help the show ratings. And also, you can follow me at GuruNischan.com for my personal recovery work on reinvention. Thanks for listening, folks. Talk to you on the next episode.